Okay. Okay. Can everybody see now? Sorry about that. All right. So I was a coloratura soprano for my career. Coloratura soprano, for those of you that don't know, is the soprano that sings the highest. Highest and flexible, has flexibility in their singing. So I could always sing high. This was something that my parents used to say, could you just tone it down a little bit? But I would always sing very, very high. Everything that I sang, happy birthday, I would always start at a higher key than everybody else. And I was always being told, you need to bring it down for the rest of us. So my parents were not musicians. I mean, they were amateur musicians, but my father was an electrical engineer. My mother was a nurse. They were very well educated, and they were not thrilled about a musical career for me. This is something I knew from very young age, and probably a lot of you who are in music just knew this was your passion and that you wanted to do this. But my parents, being, more scientific, were not all that wild about me doing that. Voice study for me in the early years. For singers, it's a bit complicated. You're not really supposed to study too early. It can hurt your voice, it can hurt your instrument. And as much as I wanted to study, it was something that my parents helped me to do, but a lot of teachers would turn me down because I wasn't old enough. So when I got to be about 14, I started to study voice, and that seems very late for you guys that are instrumentalists, I think, but voice is a complicated thing, and it's really important to study correctly and properly, and to have teachers that you can trust and depend on who will not hurt your voice. I actually studied in my early years with Ruth Drucker at Towson. I think she's been retired from Towson for some years. I'm not sure if those of you who are students remember her, but she was there for years. And this came about because one of my conductor at my church, one of the chancel choir conductor at my church, she suggested to my parents that I should have Ruth hear me, because my parents, again, were not convinced that music was the right path, and that they told her that Ruth would be able to, sorry, I'm admitting people right now, but Ruth would be honest and tell them that whether I had a talent or not, and whether I should go into the industry or not. So I went to Ruth Drucker at Towson to sing for her, to get feedback only. And when I finished singing, Ruth said, not only do I think that you should be a musician, but I would like to teach you, which was unexpected, but a nice surprise. And so I studied with her for several years while I was still in high school. She also discussed a lot of the college opportunities for me. She convinced my parents that this was the right thing for me to do, that I had the talent that was needed. And so she gave them some suggestions for colleges that I should audition for. I auditioned for 5 colleges, and I ended up going to the University of Cincinnati. So I went to the University of Cincinnati. I got a bachelor's degree in voice performance, and I was part of the opera department there. When I graduated, I took a semester off, and then I attended the Boston Conservatory of Music, where I got a master's degree in voice performance. I was also a member of the opera department there. The opera department at BCM in those days was combined with the opera department of the New England Conservatory of Music. So we combined forces to create our performances. And I was thrilled to be able to study with John Moriarty, who, if those of you who are in voice, probably know his diction book. He was an exceptional, he's studied in Europe and could tell you how to pronounce every language that you know. During my master's degree, I performed several roles. I performed some small roles and some larger ones. So these are a list of some of those that I did. And then I have just a couple of photos. This was Mrs. Gobineau in the medium. And this is Signor Rossino. And here is the Queen of the Night, magic flute. Again, the Queen of the Night, and magic flute. She's pretty horrible. horrible human. Then after I graduated, I had a professional career for about 10 years in opera. So I performed Letitia in The Old Maid and the Thief, was in La Boheme. I was a studio and apprentice artist at Central City, Colorado. I do suggest for those of you that are vocalists that that studio and apprentice artist programs are worth the little money that you make, because they introduce you to a lot of people in the industry. So you can be an apprentice artist only twice, and there are only, well, in those days there were only 5 apprentice artist programs, and you should look into those if that's something you're interested in. While at Central City, I performed in The Face on the Barroom Floor, which is an opera that was written uniquely for that city, although it's widely performed these days. And I did The Merry Widow with Boston Concert Opera and Cunegonde and Bernstein's Candide for a couple of different companies. This is my resume shot. In those days, resume shots had to be in black and white. That was because newspapers were only in black and white in those days. I think it's a little different now. I think that color photos are fine, but this was mine. I do recommend vocalists and instrumentalists that you consider getting a really nice resume shot. It will serve you well. It's something that a lot of organizations require when you're auditioning, and they want to know what you look like. They want to know, all of that. So get a good resume shot and have it doctored a little bit so you look fabulous. This is me as Letitia in The Old Maid and the Thief. Again, Letitia in The Old Maid and the Thief. This was a backstage photo of La Boheme. This is The Face on the Barroom Floor. That is my husband there to the right. We met there and fell in love and actually got married. This is Cunegonde and Bernstein's Candide. Again, another performance of Cunegonde and Bernstein's Candide. I also, one of my biggest roles was Queen of the Night in Mozart's Magic Flute. This role is one of there's only 2 arias and a quintet that are sung. The amount of time you're on stage is not very, very big, but the requirements of the vocal flexibility are pretty intense. I did this a lot. Not a lot of people can sing it, so I did this a lot. I also did Adele and Die Fledermaus quite a bit. I was in a performance of The Ballad of Baby Doe, where I was one of a quartet of women, but I was Baby Doe's understudy. I did Trixie, which is a very small role in Bernstein's West Side Story. I took this role because it paid well, and it was performed in France, which gave me an opportunity to go to France and perform. Then I did Elvira in Italian Girl in Algiers as a principal artist at the Central City Opera Company, and I performed Sister Constance in Poulenc's Dialogue of the Carmelites. So here's a Queen of the Night performance again and again. This is Adele and Die Fledermaus. Again, Adele and Die Fledermaus. This is Italian Girl in Algiers, excuse me. And this is Sister Constance in Dialogue of the Carmelites. For those of you that don't know, at the end of this opera, I am actually marching to the guillotine to have my head chopped off. Some recommendations I would give: always enter competitions. I was a Shoshana Foundation winner, which was a nice financial prize, which when you're in this industry, there isn't always a lot of money in it. And I did the Metropolitan Opera competitions, which I was a semifinalist. Concerts are a great way as well to earn money. There are different types of concerts. A lot of them are religious experiences. Some of them are concert operas, but they're little work because there's no costumes, no makeup, no stage blocking, etc. But you get to be on stage and be in front of an audience and earn some money. This is this is John Moriarty on the left here, the man who I mentioned previously, wrote the diction book that most vocalists study. This is when I was a winner of the Shoshana Foundation grant. This is another backstage photo of before a concert. And this is before another concert that I did. So I just had a bit of advice. There was no Me Too movement in the 1980s and 90s. I was very excited to see this come about recently. Um, in the 80s and the 90s, there were some things you had to look out for as a singer. You know, without getting well, just know your morals, understand where you stand, and try to maintain your integrity as you go through things. There are people that will take advantage of young females in music, and they promise power, money, um, additional performances, things like that. And these are all things that as a young musician that you want, and you just have to maintain your integrity is what I will say. Networking is very, very important in the music industry, particularly in the vocal music industry. It is as much about who you know as what you know and how talented you are. Sometimes the talent isn't as important as knowing someone who can help you get in the door. For every soprano that's out there, there are 500 others. And I just recommend that you really use your networking abilities to your best extent. Audition for everything. Audition for everything that comes up. Auditioning, you will get turned down more than you get performances, but auditioning is extremely important. The more times you're out there and in front of people, the more times you will be recognized. And it's just a great way to improve your music career. I always kept very detailed records of sorry, let me go back, of my auditioning. And I recommend this as well. In those days, there were no computers. It's much easier for you all to keep track of things these days. But I would always maintain really good records of what I was doing. So every time I would audition, I would come back to my apartment and I would write down what I sang, how I felt about it, what I felt the outcome would be. Sometimes I didn't feel good about it. Sometimes I knew I'd blown an audition, and I would write in detail what I did that I didn't do well. And I would go back and look at those things when I would audition for the same company again, or when I was auditioning for a similar role for another company. I would go back and look at those records and make sure that I was keeping track of that and improving. I was very organized. A lot of musicians are not, but I do recommend that you maintain some sort of structural organization in what you're doing so that you can keep up with all of that. It's really very important. Once you establish yourself as a professional, be very, very careful about giving your talent away for free. You will be asked that all the time. I hear you play the flute. Do you mind playing the flute at my party? Or do you mind, accompanying someone just for fun? Be careful where you do that and when you do that, because you can be taken advantage of. I think this is particularly true of vocalists, but you instrumentalists can comment on that. You will always be asked when you come home for even seeing your family. You're always asked, I'm sure, to perform, play something for us, sing something for us. Of course, in your family, that's acceptable, but be careful how much you do it for. I can tell you in my day, it was things like, we have an art exhibit opening. We'd like you to sing some art songs in the background. It'll be great exposure for you. We can't pay you because we don't have any money, but it'll be great exposure for you. I did one or two of those things in my early career, and there was never a great exposure. It's not great exposure unless you are singing in front of Leonard Bernstein himself or someone who really can get you something. It's just not worth it. So be very, very careful how you do that. Unions can be good. They definitely make sure that your pay scale is where you need it to be. They offer health insurances sometimes. It's usually very, very expensive, even through the unions. So I recommend them, I guess, but there are good and bad things about unions. Sometimes once you're a member of a union, it means you can't perform unless the orchestra or the opera house is also union. So there may be a gig you want just because you want to get your head around a certain role or a certain piece of music, and you can't do it because that company is not part of the union. So just be careful about that. Make sure that you can stay afloat while pursuing your art. For me, I didn't want to waitress. I know a lot of vocalist musicians waitress to make extra money. What I did was temp jobs. So I got paid pretty well in New York City because I knew word processing, so I could stay afloat while pursuing my art. So you still have to pay the rent, you still have to buy food. So these are all important things. And right now during COVID-19, this is going to be pretty difficult for everyone, but try to stay afloat financially while you're pursuing your art. And then make sure you have a long-term plan, whether that's getting an agent, whether that's what is your goal, and always working towards that goal are very important. So I left my professional career after 10 years. I was ready to settle down, have a normal, what I called a normal life. I wanted a family, husband, dog. I have 2 children, one of whom is on this video right now. And I wanted a house, and I wanted all of that. So I chose to give all that up. I am currently a meeting planner for the American Urological Association. So I plan meetings and events. Like I said, I was an organized person. This is how I got that kind of work. And then I'm always asked, I've been asked since I gave up singing, do I still sing? And of course I still sing. I find places where I can sing. I don't try to make money at it any longer, but I occasionally still do get a wedding or a funeral gig where I earn some money. I sing at my church. I sing in concerts. I have done some musicals for community theaters. So there is still life after that. It's still part of my life, and I still find it to be one of my passions. So with that, I think I'm done. Oh, I'm sorry. I did want to show you, I'm going to apologize for my very low tech. I wanted to show you one of my performances. I'm going to walk over here. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, I had planned to transfer some of my VHS tapes to something digital so that I could show you a performance, and that didn't happen because that was not an essential business for those folks. So I'm going to point you toward a TV, and I'm going to show you a performance I did of the Magic Flute. So sorry for the low tech. Thank you. So with that, I think I'm done with my presentation. I understand there's maybe some questions.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and speak. Okay, so Leslie, one of the questions I sent you yesterday was there ever a point where you felt like music wasn't the career for you? And if so, what brought you back?
I mean, at the end of my career, yes. During the process, I mean, certainly there are days and weeks when you audition for everything in the world. I lived in New York, so I moved to New York specifically so I could audition all the time. I would take lunch hours and go audition for things and whatnot. There are certainly times when the answer was always no and not yes. There were months that would go by like that you would just get pretty down on yourself. And it's important to have, I think, a connective relationship with friends who are involved, who are in it. I mean, your parents and your family are great support, but they don't, I mean, at least for me, my parents were not in music, did not understand what I was going through. So having a really strong support team of friends that were in it with me to cheer you up and to keep you going and all of that is very, very important, because it can get very, very depressing when you're not getting work, and you never know why. Like sometimes you come out of there thinking, I nailed that audition and I did not get that role. What happened? And it's sometimes just you just, you know, I'm a blonde. I remember auditioning for something where the guy, when I walked in, he said, oh, we were hoping you'd be a brunette because your resume looks like everything we're looking for. And I said, I can be a brunette. I can do a brunette. I can do that. And you know, I didn't get the role. And he called me later. I got a smaller role in the opera. And he said, we just really were thrown off by the fact that you were blonde. And that was really, you know, as it turned out, the only reason that I didn't get that role. But you never, for vocalists in particular, the way you look and appear is so much more important than sometimes for instrumentalists. I'm not going to say that that's a blanket statement, but there is a lot of that. Someone would say to me, we really needed somebody who looked Latin, and you just don't look Latin. I look German. I look like a German barmaid. So, you know, for some of that, that's what it is.
What do you look like? You don't know what you look like. Shut up. Nobody knows what I look like.
Okay. So what composer style genre of music do you listen to, or did you listen to when you were being a professional vocalist to find inspiration?
I listened to a lot of music. I mean, I sang a lot of Mozart. I sang a lot of Mozart, Rossini, that kind of thing. But that was my voice type. But I listened to everything. And what I tended to listen to rather than a specific composer were artists, artists I wanted to sound like. So I would listen to a lot to Beverly Sills and Joan Sutherland and folks like that I wanted to emulate. And I would listen to the perfection of their voices and think, oh, will I ever be that good? Can I ever do that? And I think that's important. I think it's important to listen to the people you emulate, not to copy their style, but to get a feeling for what they're doing that makes them successful.
Great. Are there any other questions from any of the audience? All right, if not, then Leslie, you can make me host again and stop sharing your screen, and we will continue on to Michelle Humphreys.
Okay, let me. Okay. There you go.
I think, Leslie, if you can go up to the top of your screen, there might be something that says stop share, stop screen share. Ah, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Leslie. I really enjoyed hearing about your career. That was
Thank
wonderful.
you. Thank you.
Ruth Drucker is one of my dearest friends.
I love her. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. What a great way to start a Sunday, to be here with all of you talented musicians and so many familiar faces and names. It's good to see all of you. Today, I thought I would basically just tell you a little bit about what I do, and also tell you a little bit about my journey, about how I got here, and some of the things that I've learned along the way. What I do now, for those of you who don't know, is I teach full-time at Towson University, teach percussion there. I began that job 6 years ago and love it. And I also perform. And my performing career has had lots of different flavors over the years. It's had lots of different shapes. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But right now, what I do almost exclusively is perform music of the 17th century, 16th a little bit, early 18th, so music of the Baroque era. And it's a subject that I got my doctorate